You see, you better pick an expert. And even some experts have been fooled on some pieces that appear to be of the brilliant period. Let's look at this from Video Club number 18 in the fall of 1996. I wanted to take a moment, we're back to color, so if you need to adjust your sets, but I wanted to take a moment to talk to you about something that's sort of heavy on my mind, and we're going to dwell a little bit more on this on educational video number 4. But as you know, and we've discussed this lightly in the past, and maybe I'm at fault for, just like everybody else, assuming that the reproduced glass of the 1980s was just going to either vanish or never reappear or would suddenly become old. And I have neglected to caution you about it, as I should. Many of you depend on us to keep you going on the right direction toward building a proper collection. And what's brought this to mind, this is my first opportunity to talk to you since the Memorial Day cut glass auction in St. Louis. And in our opinion, there were 3 items at that auction that are of dubious origin, and age-wise, I think they're suspect. Now, I just want to, and we will talk a little bit more about this during the last educational tape that I'll be doing later. However, I do want to mention a couple of things that are important. Now, when you hear an auctioneer tell you that they have black lighted all the stuff in the dark the night before and everything appears to be fine, folks, the black light is number 5 on a list of 5 items that need to be done if you're going to check this stuff out. Now, you may remember in our educational tape, The Buying Game, we talked about the logical sequence of going through a piece and looking at everything in a logical order. And it's logic here that plays the important role. Now, these are 5 things, and I want you to bear them in mind because they need to be looked at in their proper order. Number 1, this item that you're looking at, whether it's at a country auction, it's in an antique shop that doesn't have much cut glass, or if it's even at a show, ask yourself, is this an expensive pattern? If this were in a cut glass booth and this were right and everybody had checked it out and it was, would it be an expensive pattern? See, they don't bother to counterfeit $1 bills. It's not economically feasible. And it's also not economically feasible to counterfeit or reproduce something that's not expensive to begin with. So therefore, ask yourself, is this an expensive pattern? Now, there are no expensive patterns that we don't know the maker of. So, since you know the pattern, it appears to be expensive, you also know who made it. So go to the books and look at their blanks. That's number 2, the blank. The blank needs to be right. If this is a blank that was done by Dorflinger or Hawks, and you don't ever see this blank in Libby, and yet this pattern is in a rare Libby pattern, then be cautious. So familiarize yourself with the company's blanks. Number 3, you need to ask yourself, what you need to do right now is perhaps go get your most expensive piece of cut glass and sit and hold it on your lap for a minute. And as you hold that piece up to the light, I want you to get the light shining down that long miter on this piece. And that piece should be smooth. That miter should be polished. If it's wood polished, it should have a clean, smooth, velvety look that is just so soft and delicate. And if it's acid polished, it should be also smooth and polished with crisp, clean lines. Now, if you see tiny little microscopic almost lines running parallel to that miter, those are diamond wheel marks. They didn't use the diamond wheel back during the brilliant period. They hadn't figured it out yet. It speeds up production 4-fold, so when you're counterfeiting something or reproducing something, you can get it out in a hurry. But those don't polish off. So when you look down the miter, now here we've got an expensive pattern. We have the right blank or the wrong blank, as the case may be. we have little tiny marks, little tiny diamond wheel marks in the miters. There's a clue, folks, that this piece is not old. Number 4 in the list of 5 items is the signature. Now, early on in the counterfeiting era of the 80s, they didn't sign things. I think they were a little cautious. Then they got a little more blasé about it and began to sign. However, they didn't sign properly. They didn't sign where the piece, it's like when you put a rubber stamp on a blotter and the ink smears. So that the lines on the signature should be crisp and bright and very definite. Now, I'm not saying the whole signature should jump out at you. It may be dim. It may be just barely visible. But when you do see it, if in a strong light or with magnification and so forth, the lines on that signature must be sharp and distinct. And the ones on the reproduced pieces are often blurry. Okay, now you come to number 5, which they do at auctions, which they do at brilliant weekends and at conventions and so forth. They go in and they blacklight everything. Now, in a way, this is putting the cart before the horse, because they go in and they blacklight, and then if something looks a little different, they zero in on that. But really, it should be the other way around, because, you see, all of the old pieces from the brilliant period don't fluoresce the same. A good example. An example of a piece that they would never reproduce, Hunt's Royal, for example. Now, that fluoresces different than other brilliant period pieces. Mr. Hunt bought his blank someplace else, perhaps in Europe. But because Hunt's Royal is often on a figured blank, and more than likely it's acid polished, and it's often poorly acid polished, this is a popular pattern. But it's not an expensive pattern, and therefore it would never be reproduced. So you see, you have these 5 criteria. Now, we know, and most of you know, that this reproduced glass is out there, and it is going to begin to come to the surface. Now, maybe the people that originally bought it, maybe their children or their grandchildren want to dispose of the glass, and maybe it was all in the same cabinet with the good stuff. Who knows? But it will begin to start appearing, and you need to be aware to look for these things. First of all, look for the expensive pattern. Then look for the blank in the proper shape and form. Then, for instance, with a tray. If the tray is shaped like a trivet and it's just flat, and it doesn't have that tiny little indentation in the center and so forth, then be very cautious, because they didn't make a lot of those kind of trays. So, and then you have the acid or the diamond wheel marks, and then you have the signature that you need to look at. And then, as the last resort, you want to check the fluorescing. So I did want to mention this. Now,